2026 is a year packed with the amazing film presence of legendary horror figures who have often been regulars in cinema. One of them is particularly exciting, with Robert Eggers following up on the success of Nosferatu with Werewolf set to come out later this year. While werewolves have had multiple renditions in cinema history, there have only been rare occasions when we've been genuinely terrified or shocked by their unique takes. Let's take a look across all forms of media and see some of the werewolf stories that I'm pretty sure nobody's recommended to you. Well, at least some of them. Project Metalbeast, 1995 movie. I'm going to start with one that you might not have really heard of, but blows into really absurd territory, giving us a werewolf that gets as brutal as possible. Almost reminds you of Wolverine, to be honest. Anyway, the story begins with Special Operations soldier Donald Butler, who hunts down a werewolf in Eastern Europe. But that's just the beginning, as the US military does its part and decides to weaponize this horror legend to create its own generation of super soldiers. When sensible people walk in and stall research, Butler ends up injecting the werewolf blood into himself, and as he's transforming into a lycanthrope, he is shot down and captured. No, that's not the end yet. They managed to get him cryogenically frozen, and then 20 years later, a scientist was able to graft this lycanthrope with metal skin, giving it an armored hide. Yeah, that's as absurd as you could imagine, right? It goes one step beyond the B-movie category, offering a unique blend of the Wolfman, RoboCop, and the Terminator. And if you think the werewolf is the enemy, you're wrong, because Colonel Miller and his desperate attempts at turning the werewolf freak into a biological weapon are what caused the trouble. In fact, he's the one who, upon discovering the synthetic skin developed by the scientists that hardens like steel, decides to graft it onto the cryogenically preserved werewolf. So if you want to step away from all the folklore bits and look at something that questions the levels beyond which humans will go for their weapons, this is your choice. And if you want horror icon Kane Hodder and his Metalbeast armored werewolf, then once again, this movie is the one you should be going for. Ferals, 2012. Riddled with gore and sex, Ferals might just appear to be a regular werewolf comic at first sight, but it becomes more and more as you go on. Starting in a small town where Officer Dale Chestnut, yes, a name that doesn't get any more small town than that. Okay, let's get back to it. Officer Dale Chestnut investigates a series of murders, only to discover something far more disturbing for both regular fans and genre fans alike. Turns out there's an ancient race of predatory beings who have been secretly living among humans, and these are none other than our werewolves. The creators, David Lapham and Gabriel Andrade, intended to create something really dark, and that's where the idea of making these monstrous creatures a hidden species with their own history, hierarchy, and customs came from. In Lapham's own words, this is about a new type of being that exists in our world, the Ferals, and they're real and do have their own culture, their own thoughts, history, and plans. But even to that, Lapham added, the real trick is to not just make crossed with fur. So the next time you find lycanthropy as a supernatural affliction, you're usually stuck with the old take, something that's been the usual trend. But then Ferals is more like S. Craig Zahler's cult horror Bone Tomahawk. The werewolves are an evolutionary branch of humanity that's slowly trying to take over humanity. Hemlock Grove, TV series. If Eli Roth is behind a project, you know there's something serious cooking, or else it's a project for kids. Yes, those are the only two choices. And the previous one is the case for this Netflix original series, where a series of gruesome killings in a decaying Pennsylvania town is linked to rumors of monsters living among the residents. While the primary story revolves around Peter Romanchek, the teenager who turns out to be a Romani werewolf, it's his friendship with the wealthy Roman Godfrey that uncovers some more mysterious supernatural secrets of the series. And guess who's playing Roman Godfrey? None other than the horror legend himself, Bill Skarsgård, from the It franchise. Now, there's not much to put this series as an essential addition into the bank of werewolf content, but what's really special here is the transformation sequence. Yes, the series really delved into the concept of transforming, standing out within the genre's legacy, with the top spot always being the moment from An American Werewolf in London. In fact, it was Peter's transformation that served as word of mouth, giving the series widespread attention as it broke decades of cinematic convention. And what was so special about this transformation scene? Well, the usual way of doing around a transformation is to show the human body contorting and forming into the werewolf in what turns out to be absolute body horror. But Hemlock Grove makes it seem as though the wolf has always existed beneath the skin, waiting to emerge. So the process of transformation is more about the human being torn apart as the wolf is bursting out. It's an absolutely painful sequence, as you get to witness the human literally peeling himself apart to reveal the wolf in human skin. Yeah, I tried to do the sheepskin thing. Didn't work. So yeah, if you're up for a werewolf feature where you get to see the human body literally being ripped from the inside, then this one is definitely right up your alley. When Animals Dream, 2014 movie. If you, like most fans of the genre, have heard of the Ginger Snaps trilogy, then When Animals Dream might just be up your alley too, but just one step darker. 16-year-old Marie, living in an isolated fishing village, starts undergoing some strange developments in her body, from violent impulses to hair appearing on her skin. But she's not alone, because her catatonic mother also has the same condition, and it turns out to be hereditary lycanthropy. But unlike Ginger Snaps, there's not much horror here, apart from some jump scares, as the movie dives into dealing with the entire scenario as a social condition. In an interview with Daily Dead, Jonas Alexander Arnby spoke with absolute honesty. "I wanted to make a coming-of-age story. To be quite honest, I'm actually not a werewolf fan. I don't hate werewolf movies, I just never thought that I would make a werewolf movie. But there was something about taking a visual metaphor like a werewolf, which is almost a cliche of a coming-of-age transformation, and putting it into a young girl's developmental transformation. We wanted to use the werewolf as a potent visual metaphor." Well, it was quite clear that he isn't a fan of the werewolf genre. It's difficult to even call this movie one that would fit into the other entries in this genre, but it's something that comes close to a mix of elements from both Ginger Snaps and Let the Right One In. The latter carries similar themes to this one. By the way, if you think Marie is the only one who knows what's happening, you would be surprised how the rest of the people around her have already picked up on her developments. People started monitoring and ostracizing her even before she could come to terms with the changes. It's definitely worth a watch, but not many people would actually recommend it when it comes to a usual werewolf genre movie. Wolf Moon, 2014 to 2015. Cullen Bunn's story and Jeremy Hound's illustrations brought to life another unique take on the werewolf genre. Here, the question they wanted to raise was this: how would you catch a werewolf that assumes a different person's form every full moon? We meet Dylan, someone who's managed to survive through the process of becoming a wolf, who goes on a journey of hunting down the predator before another person is forced to live through the experience. The wolf abandons a host every full moon and randomly selects its next victim, while the previous host is forced to live through the traumatic experience of having witnessed a rampage. So werewolves are no longer limited to the idea of being a disease or a bloodline thing. Still, it's more about a supernatural curse-like entity that could also be parasitic. Instead of making the horror about coming across a werewolf, the story here becomes about going through the experience of having become a werewolf and being absolutely ravenous. During an interview with Comic Vine regarding the state of werewolf stories and how this comic takes its own steps forward, Cullen Bunn stated, "In a lot of ways, werewolf stories are themselves shapeshifters. There are so many exciting takes on the legends, from four-legged beasts to wolfmen to hulking lupin monsters. There really is something for everyone. In Wolf Moon, we're dealing with what seems like a traditional hulking monster werewolf. It's a huge, brutish creature capable of ripping its prey apart with gleeful abandon. But the method of contagion is a little different. There is no gypsy curse. This affliction is not transmitted by a bite on the foggy moors. How it is contracted is a bit of a mystery, actually, but what makes it so insidious is that the wolf jumps from host to host with each full moon. One month, I might turn into the werewolf. Next month, though, someone completely different becomes the wolf. This makes it almost impossible to track, because there's no way of knowing who's going to turn into the werewolf by the light of the full moon. And he's right. How can you kill a werewolf when it isn't confined to a single body? Roma Santa, The Werewolf Hunt, 2004. Once again, we come to a story that goes completely off the track if you're experimenting with a regular horror piece with werewolves. Roma Santa ends up asking the question in a much more realistic and legal manner. I mean it, legal manner. Can a human become a beast? Paco Plaza, a director renowned for the Rec franchise, in this very early project, goes into a blend of folklore, psychiatry, and criminal psychology. The film shows the story of Roma Santa, an individual who is apprehended in connection with a series of mutilated bodies appearing to start popping up across Galicia. Once the man is captured, the case goes into a literal courtroom, a debate over whether the individual is a monster, a madman, or someone who is quite literally a product of a condition, like lycanthropy maybe. Now that's not exactly what makes it stick out from a generic werewolf movie, because there's more. Roma Santa is actually a true story, related to the story of the Tallow Man. That's what they used to call him. Why? Because he was known to render fat from his victims and then sell it as soap. But the film presents this story as a blend of folklore and true crime. So if you're into the psychological exploration of a werewolf with court arguments and medical theories related to lycanthropy, Roma Santa's tale is worth checking out. Jughead, The Hunger, 2017. I know. The Archies have had quite a few chances to be subjected to the horrors of the world, turning the innocent pop culture icons into something fans would never have expected. Netflix actually ruined the entire concept by butchering our best friends with every season. But there's something special about that, because here we actually saw the genre's style disappear over time. But this comic from the alternate Archie horror universe delves into the darker side of Jughead's 70 years of insatiable hunger. What if it was never about food, but human flesh instead? Yeah, the insatiable hunger is actually an inherent curse, and a violent transformation results in the death of several residents of the beloved Riverdale. And guess who's out to hunt down the werewolf? None other than Jughead's close friend, Betty Cooper. The girl next door becomes the latest in the lineage of werewolf hunters who's forced to make a choice: Jughead the werewolf or Jughead the friend. So if you want to see your favorite slacker turn into a werewolf while also trying to suppress the idea of completely giving in to his bloodline, it's pretty cool and plays really well with the nostalgic elements of the Archies lore. Penny Dreadful, 2014, TV series. Like some of the other entries on this list, Penny Dreadful is not just about werewolves. It's about a gothic universe where Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and Dorian Gray coexist along with some of the other horror legends. It's tough to be a unique addition to this romper-busting list of characters, but the creator, John Logan, managed to take a unique spin on the werewolf arc for Ethan Chandler that's a lot more tragic than fans could have asked for. Chandler is first introduced as an American sharpshooter in Victorian London, who later discovers that, apart from his dark past, he is also linked to a Native American prophecy known as the Lupus Dei, which means Wolf of God, and this creature is destined to oppose Dracula. Over time, the fear of the characters shifts from the idea of transformation to the idea that Chandler would black out, and with each one of these events, he would be forced to come to terms with the havoc he wreaked. He's forced to carry this guilt along with him. By the way, the same element of grief is true for almost all the legendary characters in this arc, from Victor Frankenstein to Dorian Gray. The Cursed, 2021 movie. Just like a few of the other reinventions of the genre on this list, Sean Ellis created an arc set in rural 19th century France that explores a take on the werewolf myth that redefines its elements over the decades. While lycanthropy is often regarded as a curse, it's also closely associated with consumption in this storyline. During an interview with Nightmare on Film Street, Ellis stated, "I was trying to think, what is the modern-day version of this? What is it that modern society is plagued by? And I started to think in terms of addiction. How we're either addicted to drugs or addicted to our phones. In some way or another, we're always addicted to something. And so I started to think of the wolf as a metaphor for addiction and how you become a prisoner to that addiction. I think since I started to think in those terms, I thought that sort of infused a new approach for the mythology of it all, because you're not changing into something, you're actually becoming a prisoner of it. And I thought that's kind of interesting. Plus, there's the additional exploration of the silver bullets and their origin. Ellis added, well, that came, we all know about the silver bullet lifting the werewolf curse, but we don't really know why. And I think when you can always go into well-trodden material that we all know about, but add a fresh take to it, or a reason to it, I think those things are sort of gold, or silver, pardon the pun. You go, oh wow, that's cool. I think that's really interesting, and especially if you can mix it with something that's factual. To actually link the silver with something that was biblical added a factual foundation to it, and made it more interesting because you kind of go, yeah, I believe that because that's what I know. I know that's what silver was for. To make the link was interesting and fun, and sort of go, oh, you sort of have one of those moments when you go, what if, And the audience goes, oh, that's cool. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun when those moments happened, and a lot of fun redesigning the beast. I remember one of my original briefs was, I want a cross between a wolf and a shark. And they were like, what, a hairy shark? And I was like, no, it shouldn't have hair. You could see them sort of scratching their heads, but I think it's a pretty good description of what we ended up with, in a weird way. Yeah, it was a lot of, actually, I gotta say. So if you want to touch upon a recent reinvention of the genre, Sean Ellis might have delivered quite well on that. Were 2013. Once again, lycanthropy is no longer a supernatural curse, but a medical phenomenon in this overlooked film that takes a realistic approach to the genre. Once an American family is brutally massacred during their vacation in France, authorities end up discovering a hirsute local man named Talon Gwynech as the prime suspect. What begins as an open and shut case soon turns into an exploration of a rare genetic disorder, investigated by the defense attorney Kate Moore. William Brent Bell, the director, tries to ground the mythological legend in reality by associating the medical condition with porphyria and hypertrichosis, two major disorders linked to both vampiric and werewolf lore. So Talon is not the cursed monster you might have thought, but rather a patient who will be triggered by his interactions with the medical world. In fact, one of the most disturbing scenes in the movie is when Talon is kept under observation and subjected to tests to examine the rare disease. But instead, it ends up triggering a catastrophic transformation, resulting in the butchering of the medical people. Now, one might think that it's about the triggering of the werewolf arc, but it's more about the medical process or clinical observation awakening the werewolf. I'm really excited to see how Robert Eggers contributes to the genre and how disturbing it will turn out to be. In fact, checking these movies out might just be the perfect preparation for the Eggers Nightmare hitting theaters later this fall.